What's good, everyone? Today I'm going to be talking a lot about Prometheus. Now, this movie is really big, has a lot of ideas, and I haven't stopped thinking about it since I watched it. It doesn't all come together perfectly, but it's very interesting. This is like the most notes I've taken on like any movie ever, so I do have a lot to say about it, a lot that I've thought about it. So let's get into it. First, I want to talk about how this movie feels like a big just screw you to the Alien vs. Predator movies. Like, it does a bunch of stuff in the very beginning that just blatantly contradicts all the wacky lore from those movies, where, they find these, like stone tablets or whatever from various civilizations across the world that never had contact, that is like that functions as a map that leads them to a big alien pyramid which is very similar to Alien vs. Predator, where they're in this pyramid designed for hunting aliens that was built by three ancient civilizations that supposedly never had contact. Although the pyramid it leads to in this movie, they call it a pyramid multiple times. It's a big dome, so I don't know what that was about. Maybe structurally on the inside of the dome it's a pyramid. I didn't notice it, but whatever. And they reveal that it was the engineers that taught humans how to build the pyramids, among other things, and not the predators. How could you do that, Ridley Scott? How could you do this? And it wasn't Charles Bishop Wayland who founded Wayland Corp. It was Peter Wayland, played by Guy Pearce in this movie. He goes through this huge makeup transformation. Like, I saw his name in the beginning, I'm like, oh, I wonder who he plays. And then I completely forgot he was in the movie. I never noticed him, and like I never guessed it was him under all that makeup. And just like looking at this old man, and I could see this guy. I'm like, that looks like makeup. It looks like a younger guy playing an older guy. But I never connected that it was Guy Pearce until the credits. But from there, ignoring the AVP contradictions that I don't really care about, I just thought it was funny. We follow this group of scientists on a spaceship called the Prometheus, who find these tablets that they think is going to lead them to mankind's creators, that are just space aliens that made them. And they go off to this far off planet and they find their dead bodies, and turns out they're right. They share DNA. They're like, oh, we came from these space aliens that kind of look like us but bigger and balder. And when they find like their dead bodies, they're like, what killed them? And then they find these rooms with all this mystery goo, and then there are all these like tiny little aliens and stuff running around. And so there's like lots of mystery and intrigue, like what happened, what were they doing here? It asks all these questions, builds up this intrigue, and there are plenty of interesting enough twists and turns along the way. A lot of stuff that they imply, but they don't really confirm that this is what happened, because there's not really any way of knowing because all the engineers are dead. And when you get to the end, it's ultimately unsatisfying, because the big question is, why did the engineers create us? And then it doesn't really answer that question. They're like, well, maybe they just did it because they could. That's why you created David, their AI, and then, which that in itself is kind of interesting, but it's not a full answer. And then they just ask another question, like, well, then why did they? We learn later, it's like, why did they change their mind? Why did they want to destroy us? And then you don't find out. It sort of sets up the sequel. So it's like, the quality of this movie kind of depends, I guess. I assume on Covenant. I'll be watching that one soon. So we'll see how that goes. Now, as an Alien prequel, this movie really doesn't work that well, where it's set in 2095. That's not far off from where we are now. And all of the technology is so far advanced from, where we are, like hundreds, maybe thousands, I don't know what year, in the future where Alien and Aliens take place. And all the technology there looks very dystopian and, run down, bare bones, like anything could, like the Nostromo could fall apart at any minute. And maybe that's like a class thing. They never really elaborate on that in the movies. That maybe, in Alien, they're just space truckers, so maybe they just have a bad spaceship. But in this movie, they're just, a normal science excursion, and they get the classiest ship imaginable. So it just doesn't really line up. Like, all the technology just seems years ahead of the future, which doesn't make sense, except for AI, where David is, you can tell he's a robot. It's like he looks human, but as soon as he starts talking or moving around, it's like Yeah, he's a robot. So that didn't really work. It doesn't matter a whole lot. But then when it actually tries to tie into Alien, where, one of the best parts of the original Alien is like you see the space jockey sitting there and it's just so ominous. It's like, what was he doing here? Like, who is this guy? And you never get to find out. And then they sort of reveal it in this movie where it's like you're following the one living engineer, and then he puts on the helmet and then he sits in the spaceship and it looks exactly like the spaceship from Alien, except it doesn't have any of like the xenomorph eggs or whatever. It's like these weird faces, and there's a lot of sort of pre-evolutions to the aliens we see in the other movies, which we'll get more on those creatures later. But it's not the same stuff as we see on the spaceship in Alien. And there's a shot of him putting on the helmet, sitting in the big chair, the big iconic chair, and he's about to take off in his spaceship. And they're like, okay, this is it. This is giving us some answers what he was doing. He was off to go to Earth to destroy humans using, these weird new aliens as sort of a biological weapon, I guess. Which I guess is kind of interesting, but then they totally fumble it by him getting out of his chair and sort of crashing the spaceship and then dying to a big squid monster. And it's like, well, was that the same guy or not? Because he's dead, he's not in the chair, so he's not going to magically get up, put on his helmet, and sit in the chair again. So it's like you kind of did a tease, and you're like, no, it's not the same thing. It's not the same thing. You thought, but like, what? Why would you do that? It just doesn't work. Like, is this just a plot hole they didn't think about? How do you not think about that? Like, it just seems like a really weird thing to get wrong. Like, sure, you can crash the spaceship there, that's why it's sitting there. But, like, that doesn't explain why all the aliens are different or why he's dead and not sitting in his chair. Like, it just seems dumb. Like, something really obvious that they really fumbled there. Now, this movie has a really sort of impactful, interesting atmosphere where in the other alien movies where you're exploring the spaceship, for instance, at the beginning of Alien, there's a lot of dread, terror, like fear of the unknown, like where are these mysterious creatures, and like are they dangerous, which they are, and it's a horror movie. This movie definitely, at the beginning at least, takes on more of a sense of wonder, where it's like you're following these scientists, like having the experience of a lifetime, like, yes, you found life beyond Earth for the first time, and it feels almost like a Spielberg movie, mostly I say because of the incredible score by Mark Streitenfeld. It's really good. It has like this big sense of wonder, especially in the scene where David is like discovering this big hologram map of the universe. That was a really cool scene. But then it very quickly turns into the traditional horror feeling of Alien. And this movie also functions really well as a horror movie. I thought this was probably the scariest movie in the series so far, actually, where the kills in this are pretty like terrifying and like kind of grotesque, really, where you get like these little worm things that are sort of like the face hugger, and it's like biting him and like crawling in his skin and stuff. And yeah, some of the kills in here are pretty grisly. And like there's this guy who gets like an infection with like a tiny little worm that crawls in his eye, which is just nasty. And then they go a little over the top with that, where he's like a zombie and he's like covered all the makeup. I'm like, that looks a little bit cheesy, a little out of place here, but it was still pretty cool, where he's just like tearing people apart. There's a part where the girl has an alien inside of her, and so she goes into like the med bay that's only designed for men, and so she has to like rig it to give her like a C-section, and like the alien gets like pulled out of her, and it's like still like trying to attack her. It was really, really intense. It was a really great scene. So this movie really like nailed like the atmosphere of like, wow, we're going off to an alien world, we're exploring, we're learning the secrets of the universe, and then halfway through sort of transitioning to a horror movie. That all worked fairly well. Now I want to talk about the characters a bit. We get a stacked cast all around. Idris Elba, it's a lot of fun as the ship captain. Michael Fassbender does an incredible job as David, where he's modeled after Lawrence of Arabia. And it's like, I believe it. He is Lawrence of Arabia. If they did a remake, get Fassbender for this because he nailed it perfectly. He's like the exact same character except as a robot, which works surprisingly well. Like he was a lot of fun. Now Charlize Theron's character, I didn't really like at all. It didn't really feel like she needed to be there. She felt like, well, she even felt like she could have been played by anyone. Like it didn't really need to be Charlize Theron. Like she didn't feel like a major character. It just felt like, oh, she's important because she's played by a big actor. She just kind of felt there to be a jerk face to everyone, and then they do like this big forced reveal at the end where it's like, "Ooh, Peter Whalen's her dad." It's like, that didn't add anything to the story. Like, what is the point of that? I could have guessed it too. Like, it didn't really feel like a big reveal. I kind of figured it. So I don't know. She wasn't really an interesting character. She doesn't even really do a whole lot. So I don't know. Didn't really care for that character. And this movie plays a lot like the original Alien, where you're in with this whole crew, and it doesn't really feel like there's any main character until like 3/4 of the way through, and most of them are dead, and then you kind of pick out like an Alien, like, oh, Ripley's the main character, but it didn't really feel like it for the first 2 acts. This movie, it's Elizabeth Shaw. She gets like the same treatment where it's like she's just in the mix of all the characters until the end where she sort of becomes like the final girl. And when you think about it, she really is the most interesting character. And she has this big thematic character arc that ties in with the themes of the movies, and it's very interesting, but it does not come together cleanly at all. Where her big motivation is to find mankind's creators in space, while she's also a Christian that believes in God, and it contradicts itself. And the idea of being a religious person and then finding out that your creators are just some space aliens, that can be very interesting. Where Alien has always been a very bleak, hopeless series of movies where, you get to the end and there's still just that little bit of hope for this last person to survive, except Alien 3, that movie's just completely hopeless. And this movie's the same, but it maybe goes a little bit too hard for it, but it goes very grand at the same time, where what could be more bleak and hopeless than finding out your creators are just some random people out in space that created you for the heck of it and then decide to destroy you without reason or warning. That's very bleak. And finding out that, maybe there isn't a god and that these aliens just created you, that's very hopeless. And they sort of try to have her, maintain that spark of hope, where she's like, well, something must have created the engineers. Maybe that's God. And then, we still don't get any answers at the end of this movie. So she's like, I'm going to go find where these aliens are and get some answers, which I guess that's setting up the sequel. But it just doesn't all come together because it's like, there aren't weird alien people in the Bible. So you can't really believe that Oh, I whacked my microphone. You can't really believe that anymore because, that's like one of the biggest things. That doesn't match up, then why believe any of it? So it doesn't really work for the character. If it was like some made up 2095 space religion, then yeah, go for it. Maybe that'll work more. But it just contradicts where, it's very powerful character work to have her still maintain hope in the most hopeless situation possible. But it just doesn't come together because of how they chose to write the character. Now, there's something they could have done. Maybe they were trying to do. I don't really think they were. But there is some talk in the movie of, I believe because I choose to believe. And maybe they're going for like, yeah, maybe God isn't real, but it's easier to believe that it is than facing the harsh reality of being created by space aliens just because they could. And that's interesting. That's something very real that a lot of people go through in real life. Not minus the space aliens, but just like being here for no reason. A lot of people face that, existential crisis. But I don't think that's really what they were going for. And maybe they could have made this character work more if they did, but not really what went down. And this movie is visually stunning, where I think they must have shot on location a lot. Looked like, I'm just making this up, but like Iceland or Greenland or whatever as like the alien planet, and it looks beautiful. It's all shot very well, and the CGI is all near immaculate, but it's sort of in that uncanny valley where it's like, it looks great, but it's still CGI. I can still kind of see it. It's not completely believable, but it's still pretty great. However, the designs of everything, like I said, don't really mesh with the rest of the Alien universe. But beyond that, it's just the most generic 2010s designs for spaceships, where it's just all gray, blue, and white with the holograms and touchscreens everywhere. And it's like, well, that just takes all the character out of it. All the spaceships and like space stations and locations had a lot more character in the other Alien movies, and this one just doesn't. It just feels generic. But when you get to, the Alien spaceship, it's just the same as the one in the original Alien, maybe a little bit less interesting, where it feels like, yeah, here's this set, you've seen it before, you're familiar with it, check out all this new stuff. And like I said, it's just the most generic, uninteresting new stuff possible. And the new stuff you get on the Alien spaceship is this big statue of a human head. It's like, what's that about? that was weird. It's probably a metaphor I didn't understand, but whatever. Now, as for the aliens and creatures themselves, I think the design of the engineer is fine. They were going for, what did humans come from? They look like humans, except smoother and bigger, so cool, I guess. As for, like, the more monstrous stuff, they tried to go for, pre-evolution, what came before the face huggers, chest bursters, and xenomorphs, whatever. And you can see that, like, it's good design in the sense that, like, oh, that's like a face hugger. It's like a tiny little worm and it has the same face but doesn't have, like, the big spider legs and stuff. And, it's just a less interesting design. Like, it's well made because you can tell it's supposed to be the same thing but thousands of years ago, but it just looks generic. The other early version of face hugger is this giant squid. And it's like, what's that about? That's dumb. It has a thing that goes in your mouth and, I guess, impregnates you with an alien. Which that did happen at the end of the movie, where you get, like, this early xenomorph. And it's interesting because it feels like it's supposed to be, like, a failed science experiment. And it's, like, it comes out, it's all, like, skinny and weird looking. And the second mouth that pops out of its face, like, it's like wrapped behind another layer of skin, like it wants to come out but it can't, and like it's an abomination. So I guess we'll see where that goes in the next movie, probably how it turns into a xenomorph. Again, it's just less interesting creature design, but it's also still well made because you can tell it's the earlier version, something different. So kind of conflicted on that. Now Prometheus, it goes big, goes grand, has lots of ideas, all very interesting that I haven't stopped thinking about. A lot of it doesn't come together. Now, this is a movie I have a lot of respect for, but it keeps itself from greatness by not being completely thought through, not having satisfying conclusions, not having the most interesting versions of, visual design. So I give it a 7 out of 10. I wasn't bored. There's a lot of interesting stuff. It doesn't really fit in with the rest of the series, so 7 out of 10. That's all I got for Prometheus. Thanks for watching.